Today we're going to visit Egypt, but not the Egypt of today. We're going to explore the Egypt of thousands of years ago, known as Ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt was one of the most important civilizations of all human history. It was one of the earliest great civilizations, and also one of the longest lasting, with more than 3,000 years of history. The reason Egypt was so successful was mainly thanks to the river that runs through the country from south to north. This river is of course called the Nile, and the civilization of ancient Egypt has been called the gift of the Nile. The river is so important because most of the country is desert, hot and dry, with very little water. It's extremely difficult for any life to survive in a desert, so supporting a great civilization with a large population would be impossible without enough water. The River Nile is important for many reasons. For example, it allows people to use boats to travel up and down the country. People can also get food from the river by catching fish. But the real reason the river is so important is that every year it floods. Because the Nile is a very long river, the water has had the chance to pick up a lot of nutrients. When this water floods onto the land around the river, it gives the plants and crops not only water, but also these nutrients. The fact that the Nile floods every year was extremely helpful to Egyptian agriculture. It meant that every year the Egyptian farmers could produce more than they needed. They could grow more than they could eat themselves. This extra food gave the Egyptians a surplus. It was this surplus that was the real reason ancient Egypt was so successful, and the reason why it grew into one of the world's great civilizations. If there hadn't been a surplus, everyone would have had to grow their own food. But because there was a surplus, it meant that not everyone needed to be a farmer. Some people could do other things. And these other things are what we call culture, art, religion, and great buildings. The most famous of these are, of course, the pyramids. The kings or leaders of ancient Egypt were known as pharaohs. The pharaohs built these great pyramids for themselves for after they died. A pharaoh built a pyramid as a final resting place, as a tomb. These pyramids were built by thousands of people, but how exactly they did it is still a mystery. For a long time, it was thought that the pharaoh forced people to build them for him, that the people working there were slaves. But more recently, some people have argued that the workers were actually paid for their work. Maybe in the future we'll understand everything about how the pyramids were built. But for now, a lot of research is still to be done. The pharaoh was also seen as a god, or at least as somebody in between the human world and the world of the gods. When everything was going well, the people believed the pharaoh was doing his job well. When things in the country were not going well, such as when farmers had a bad year or when there was a drought, the people believed the pharaoh was to blame. Egyptians also had a strong belief in the afterlife, or the next life. They believed that when someone died, you could help them in the afterlife if you did certain things. Tombs were often filled with things that could be useful in the next life, such as food or jewelry. More important people, however, went through a different ritual. They were made into a mummy. This process was meant to keep their body in a good condition for as long as possible. This meant that their journey into the next life would be easier. Religion was a very important and very interesting part of ancient Egyptian life. Today, when we look at the world and see things like the weather, the sun, the stars, we can understand them through science. But a long time ago, before we had much scientific knowledge, people used religion to try and understand the world. In Egypt there were many different gods. In fact, some people have said there may have been as many as 2,000. Some of these gods were worshipped by all Egyptians, while some were only worshipped in certain areas of the country or by certain people. Many animals were seen as gods, such as cats, birds, and crocodiles. Some gods were also part human, part animal. One god, Horus, had the head of a bird and the body of a human. They also worshipped a sun god, a god of the dead, a god of learning, and a god of fertility. Ancient Egypt is one of the most fascinating areas of human history, and we continue to learn more about it every year. Who knows what mysteries there are still to be discovered?